Cool. Well, thank you everyone for being here. I'm excited to talk to you today. My talk title is Why You Need a Design System and How to Do It Right. As she mentioned, my name is Tyler. I'm a senior software engineer and tech lead at Adobe. I've been working on design systems for several years now at my last few jobs. Something I'm passionate about and have some thoughts and opinions about. So excited to share those with you today. If you want to connect with me, I'm active on LinkedIn, not so much on Twitter, but I'm there. And I do write a lot. If you want to read any of the things I'm thinking about or writing about, I frequently post on Medium. So let's get started. So what is a design system? So a design system is essentially a reusable set of components that you can use to design, develop, and build an application. When we think about design systems, we often think about component libraries. That's the most visual artifact that comes to mind. So you can see here in this example, this is just a few screenshots of a sample design system. So you might have more atomic components like buttons or checkboxes or links or radio buttons that you can use to build your app. Those can be built up into larger what they would call like molecule components, and then eventually templates and pages as you build your app larger and larger. But they're essentially the building blocks of your application. It's important to remember though that a design system, it's a lot more than just a component library. The component library is definitely the most visible artifact of it, especially from an engineering side or developer side. That's the thing that you're working with and using. But there's a lot more that goes into it than just that. So for instance, the design system, before it's developed and written in code, the design system first has to be designed, right? So that's coming from your UX people, your UX designers. So they usually design a collection of design assets or tokens in some sort of tool, like maybe Figma or Sketch or InVision. So they'll design those before they're developed. They'll also provide a lot of design patterns and guidelines for you. So not just here are a set of components, go use them, but rather a lot of guidance on when to use things properly, right? Like when should it be a primary button versus a secondary button? When should you use a tooltip versus a modal for displaying extra content? So there's a lot more of these design guidelines and patterns that you use. And then it might even include some of the branding stuff. So something that feels a little bit more marketing, right? As far as like, these are the kinds of fonts we use, or even just like the tone of voice that we use for content and copy in our app. That might be included in your design system as well. So it's more than just a component library. But if you want a simplified model, you can think of it as a set of components. So the crux of the talk, why should you use a design system? There are really four main reasons, at least that come to mind. The first is to provide consistency in your app, both in the UI and in the UX. The second is to speed up the development process, to help you build things faster, ship code faster, get to market faster. It helps you enable change, both as your components evolve over time and also as you undertake larger rebranding changes or major stylistic changes. And design systems also allow you to focus on the hard UX problems. So those are four main reasons. So let's go through those one by one. So providing consistency. So these are some screenshots from the product I'm working on right now from the product Workfront, which is a work management tool that we use inside of Adobe. And these are some screenshots from a few years ago. This is back in like 2019 or 2020. But you can see we had quite a lot of different styles in our app. We've got some examples of menus on our left, lots of different ones. Some have different highlighting when you're selecting them. Some are in different colors. Some are black or gray or blue. Some have avatars, some don't, but many different styles there. Same for the buttons. You can see we've got conflicting shades of blue that we've used. Some buttons have outlines, some do not. Some have icons, some don't. You could look at things like links over here. We've got kind of a mix of all sorts of different approaches there as well, right? We have some, again, different shades of blue. Some are bold, some are normal text, some are underlined. And then the tabs as well, you can see for navigating within tabs within a page, we have a whole bunch of different styles. And so this was a problem that we were trying to tackle and to fix a little bit, because we have kind of this mix and match of styles throughout the app, and everything works fine, right? There's nothing necessarily broken about the different links or buttons or tabs, but it does provide an inconsistent user experience, especially for more complex components. It's nice as a user to be able to recognize what a type of widget is, and what it will do, and have a consistent understanding of how it will behave. And when you don't have that, right, you provide an opportunity to confuse or disorient users within your app. And so design system can really help provide that consistency. If you're all pulling from the same source, you're all using the same components that have the same styles, the same UX patterns. So you have a much more consistent experience in your app. If you want a good case study from this, Spotify is a perfect example of a company that greatly benefited from using design system. You can see here in this original image, Spotify, has a music streaming app that they have in lots of different formats and mediums. So you can listen to it. You can use Spotify on your phone. You can use a desktop app. You can use it in the browser. And as Spotify began to build out their platform, they had just quite a different experience from app to app. The styles were different. The interactions were different. And it really didn't feel like the same product at all. The Spotify team started to notice this drift in their design, and started in earnest, starting in about 2013, to unify their design so that you'd have a consistent experience, regardless of what page you're on or what device you're on, or if you're using your computer or your phone, it would look the same. And so what they did is they spent a few years from 2013, 2014, and 2015, they worked on building a design system. Along with that, they did kind of a design refresh. And you can see, fast forward to their launch, this looks a lot like more of the Spotify that we know and love today. It's a very consistent UI. No matter if you're using it on your phone, your tablet, your laptop, your desktop, it all looks very consistent. There's no confusion in how to use Spotify when switching from your phone to your computer. So let's look at the second one. So speeding up the development process. Anytime I think about someone that does not want to use a design system, this image comes to mind, trying to pull a cart with square wheels. Don't do that. There's a better way, right? A design system can help you speed up the development process. A lot of the things that we're building in web pages and web apps have a lot of repeated content. You'll have lots of buttons throughout your app, and tooltips and modals and drop downs. And it's a lot easier to just pull from a single source of truth and implement something like a reusable modal that you could get up and running in your app in about 5 minutes, rather than rebuilding it from scratch every time. If you're rebuilding it from scratch, oftentimes what you're doing is you're copying and pasting code from elsewhere in your app. You might miss some styles here and there. If it changes in one place in your app, you'll have a hard time finding everywhere else that you copied and pasted your code and need to change it there. And you're opening yourself up for more surface area for bugs. So if you want to go fast, use a design system. The third one that we've talked about a tiny bit so far is that design systems help enable change. So if we want to consider just a really simple change, maybe you have a primary button that has a blue background, white text, and kind of some soft rounded edges. And maybe you want to change it in your design system to have a green background and maybe a more rounded edges there with the border radius. So if you were to not be consistently using a design system throughout your app, you can see up in that top left corner, we'll say that's our design system button right there, that blue. And then over on the right, we've got a bunch of different usages in our app. So maybe that first one, that save button, let's say that did use the design system. Let's say the second one, the accept button, did not use the design system, but it was styled the same. So we copied and pasted some of those styles. And then that create filter button is just a totally different one-off case that we didn't even attempt to use the design system. So now let's say we want to go make that change, right? We want to go change it from the blue to the green. What's going to happen in our app? When that happens, we're going to get into an even more inconsistent state throughout our app. The one button that used the design system now follows those new changes. The one that was styled like the design system but did not use it still has the old styles, right? So we have to go back and fix those. And that third one is still looking awful over there on its own. So now we've created an even more inconsistent experience by only using our design system in some places of the app. So let's look at a good example now. So let's go back to the start again. We've got that blue button. We've got lots of other buttons throughout our app, and we've all used the design system. So now we go through and we make a change. We've changed it from blue to green. And as soon as we go upgrade that version of the design system in our app, boom, everything there is green. So you can see design systems make it really easy to roll out changes. It makes it really easy to have that consistent UI. This is perfect for just making tweaks to your components as you go, and especially in large rebranding changes. You know, companies love to do that every few years, give themselves a fresh new look. Design systems can really help speed up that process. And now the fourth reason, design systems allow you to focus on the hard UX problems. So an opposing viewpoint, some pushback that you might receive, I've heard a few times, is someone might say, I don't want to be limited by a design system. You know, I don't want you to tell me how everything should look. I'm a creative professional, and I want to decide, you know, what my app is going to look like. If I'm a designer, I want to decide what my mockups look like. And as an engineer, I want to build something new. And that is an understandable opinion, but I think it's a little bit misguided, because, you know, if we think about that, you know, if you're designing a new feature, do you really want to rethink how a button should look on each page? You want to think about all the different styles, the fonts, the padding, the interaction states of hover and focus and active. Do you really want to rethink that for every single button every time? And that's just for a button. Do you really want to redesign like all the interactions for things that are more interactive, like a drop-down menu? Maybe you have a combo box or an autocomplete. Do you really want to rethink how that works every time? Or would you rather, you know, think about the UX? Do you want to think about the actual workflow on the page and making it a great user experience? The truth is that design systems, they don't limit creativity, they enable creativity. They take care of those simple building blocks for you so that you can then be creative in solving the customer problems as you combine those pieces of the design system to build your app. So just as a quick recap, why should you use a design system? Provides consistency, speeds up the development process, enables change, and allows you to focus on the hard UX problems. In short, you need a design system. None of that, honestly, is very controversial. That's pretty generally accepted wisdom at this point, and people would be wise to follow it. If you want to build an app that scales, you need a design system. Where the fun part comes in is how you start to actually implement that. You know, the two main questions are, do you build your own, or do you use a third party? And that's where the real fun comes in. And so if we were to look at some technical considerations, either when building your own or when searching for a third-party design system to use, you might want to consider things like, do you want it to be framework specific or framework agnostic? So for example, you know, maybe you commonly develop applications in React, so maybe you choose a React design system. But what if your company then acquires someone that their whole tech stack is in Angular or Vue? You now can't use that design system with that, right? So do you want to do something more framework agnostic? It's a tough call. It's a tough call, especially if you can't predict the future. You also want your design system to be well tested, less places for bugs to hide. You can have more confidence in using that code. You want it to be well documented. It's not enough just to have a collection of components. You really need to have good guidelines on how to use them, when to use them, what the appropriate use cases are. You want that documentation to be there. You also want it to be accessible. Web accessibility is extremely important, something I'm passionate about. You want the products that you're building to be usable by everyone. People who use the mouse or the keyboard or a screen reader or other assistive technology should be usable by everyone. You want it to be easy to use from a developer standpoint, simple to work with the design system. You want these components to be composable so that it's easy to put things together. If you want a button that should have a tooltip on it, it should be easy to combine a button and a tooltip component. You want the design system to provide clear design guidance while still being flexible. So it has some very clear standards of how things should look, but it maybe provides some escape hatches if you need to make some one-off tweaks or some customizations for different use cases. You also want to consider things like bundle size. Make sure it's a small bundle size so that your app is still performant. And you want it to be stable, so not a lot of breaking changes, not having to constantly redo implementations of the design system as you work in the app. So those are a lot of technical considerations to think about, both as you're building design system or as you're evaluating a design system to go use. Now, what's interesting is that really is the easy part. That might sound like a lot of things from the technical side, but that's the easy part. The truth is that building and maintaining a design system is more of an organizational challenge than it is a technical one. So what do we mean by that? Why is it more of an organizational challenge? So some of these considerations, some organizational considerations you might think about are ownership. If you're building a design system, who owns it? Who's in charge of actually creating the components when the design system is first being built? And then who's in charge of maintaining it as you move forward? If bugs are reported or issues are found, who fixes those? If new features are requested, who implements those? From a larger standpoint, who owns the vision and the roadmap of the design system? Who gets to decide what goes into the design system or doesn't? Ownership is a tough problem. A second one is allocation of time and resources. Maybe you have a team that's owning the design system, but is that their full-time job? Or is that their part-time job, or while they're still working on other feature work with their development teams? Figuring out the right balance of time and resources is a tough problem. The next are things like training and communication. Are you making sure that the design system is easy to use, it has good documentation, people understand that it exists, they understand when updates are made, they understand when breaking changes are introduced? Who's in charge of facilitating all of that? And then finally, things like buy-in and adoption. How do you make sure that your design system is actually being used, and that people are not just continuing to build things on their own without the design system? So let's look at some of those. Let's consider some of those organizational problems. So the first is with ownership. These are 3 different governance models that you might find with the design system. So we can talk about a centralized, a federated, or a hybrid model. So centralized model on the left, essentially a core team owns that design system. That is their full-time job. All they do is work on the design system, and then other people consume it. So these people building the design system, they've got an advantage of being able to focus on it. That's really their only job. They don't have extra distractions or priorities or responsibilities. The problem is that they might become kind of out of touch. They're not actually building the application. They're not the ones consuming the design system. And so there might be a disconnect between what they're building and what people really need. Or maybe it's hard to use, but they don't understand that because they're not the ones actually using it. So that's the centralized governance model. With a federated model, you have the exact opposite. There's no core team that owns the design system. Instead, you just have this distributed system of maintainers. They might contribute to the design system part-time. They're working on different teams, right? And so no one really fully owns the design system. And so some advantages to that is it's easy to get adoption and buy-in because everyone's contributing to it and using it. They understand the problems that they're trying to solve. The harder part really comes back to like the roadmap and the vision and that sense of ownership. If everybody owns the design system, then really no one does. When bugs are submitted, who's going to be the one to fix them? People usually aren't jumping in to volunteer to fix the bugs. If we have questions about what should or should not be in the design system, who makes the final call? Who's actually in charge here? That's hard to know with a federated model. And so on the right, we have the hybrid model. And that, as you can see, is the best of both worlds. When With that, we have a centralized, or we have a core team, I should say, that owns the design system. They're responsible for it. They're in charge. But then we also have this distributed system of maintainers who works on the design system and contributes to it. And so with that, you really get the best of both worlds. You can have that clear vision and ownership while also expanding the adoption, the buy-in. You can have more people contributing. That little orange person on the right is a new contributor. So the hybrid model is honestly the recommended model when it comes to building and maintaining a design system. And so when you look at that, again, with the ownership, the core team, they're responsible for the vision, what the design system will be, what it will be in the future. Same for the roadmap. They can decide what features are coming, what breaking changes are coming. They set the standards, especially for things like code reviews. They can make sure that the quality of the code is high, that it's well tested. And then the distributed maintainers, these are people that are contributing to the design systems. They may be contributing new features. They may be helping fix bugs. And they're really helping with the evangelism and the adoption of the design system as they work on the actual product and features throughout the company, and the features that the company is actually working on building with the design system. And so when you can then consider things like the allocation of time and resources, it's really important that for the core team, the design system is their only job. Design systems really don't work if it becomes just this kind of part-time side project. Things get missed, core activities get missed, and it's hard to prioritize things properly. So for the core team, the design system is their only job. And then for the distributed maintainers, they work on the design system part-time, but they're also part of other feature teams throughout the company. And so they're doing other feature work as well. And so because the design system is, the core responsibility, the only responsibility of the core team, they can focus a lot more on the training and communication. So they can set very clearly defined processes. So things like how to contribute to the design system, what the standards are. They can talk about how to submit a new feature request or make decisions about, what actually goes into the design system. One of the most important things they can do is provide that documentation and examples. Again, it's not enough just to have a set of components. You need a bit of guidance on how to use them properly, not just from a developer standpoint of here are the different props they accept and here's how you can configure it, but also a lot of do's and don'ts of, here's how to use, when you want to use radio buttons versus a select menu, when you should use a tooltip versus a modal, how to properly actually use these components. Then they're also in charge of thinking about the roadmap, the release plan, the breaking changes. So they're doing the more higher level, big picture stuff, really maintaining that vision again of what the design system is and where it's going. And they might communicate that maybe through an internal blog, maybe an external blog, maybe a newsletter, but some sort of announcements, right, to keep people in the loop. And so then when we think about buy-in and adoption, this really becomes kind of the job of the distributed maintainers. So the distributed maintainers, they are actually using the design system. They help evangelize and advocate for it with their teams, make sure that their teammates are using it as well. They make sure that people aren't frequently making these one-off tweaks to the design system, make sure that when new features are needed or when bugs are found, that people contribute back. So they really help with that adoption. And so at this point, we can pause. You might be thinking to yourself, that seems like a lot of work. That's a lot of work to build and maintain your own design system. And you would be right. You'd be right. And the reason for that is a design system is not a side project. A design system is a product. And if companies are trying to build their own internal design systems, but they just want it to be this little side project, honestly, it won't work. It won't work over time. Things will become deprioritized. And that's why it's important to think about it as a product. And so with that understanding, if you understand that a design system is a product and not just this side project, you might have a follow-up question. What if we're not willing to put in this level of effort? That is a fair question. Maybe you don't want to dedicate those resources and those time to building and maintaining a design system. And if that's the case, then use a third party. There are a lot of great third-party design systems out there. As you use a third-party system, you're going to lose a little bit of control, right? Because you're not the one building it. So you're going to be adhering to another group's standards. You're going to be using what they've built, but you will free up a bunch of your resources as you're not the actual one working on it. But regardless, you need a design system. Thank you. That's all I have for you today. Again, my name is Tyler Hawkins. If you want to get a hold of me, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or Twitter. Feel free to follow my work on Medium. But thank you for listening.
Hi. Yeah, this is awesome. Thanks a lot, Tyler. I think it's very interesting, like, especially like getting into the grounds of, organization management, and it's all like a lot of responsibilities that that like a front end engineer, like a UX person needs to keep in mind, to go in a very organized way and like smooth and accessible flow of design. So it's very interesting. Thanks a lot. So we have a bunch of questions out there. So let me just read it out for you. So we have some newbies attending the session today, and I think like they just need a little bit of advice on where they need to get started, like whether with third parties, like starting about the third parties, or like to start from scratch, or anything else that you want to advise them on, like please share your thoughts.
Yeah. So new to the design system concept, and I assume you're talking about the concept of implementing the design system at your company. So I would consider, thinking about some of those questions that we discussed today, of just understanding that design systems take a lot of work, and balance that with the needs of your company. So if you're a smaller company and there's probably not a lot of time and resources, or maybe you're a startup and you're just trying to get moving and ship something, definitely start looking at a third party. There are plenty of good ones out there. If you want to start building your own, whether that's a side project for a personal thing, right? Or if you are thinking about building one as a company, looking at third party is also still a great place to start. You can get a better idea of what kind of components should go into a design system. You can get an idea of what good documentation looks like, or even just start trying to use some of them. You can get a feel for this kind of architecture works or this doesn't. So yeah, definitely start looking at those third party ones first.
Yeah, that's. I mean, there is a similar question. I think that also answers a bit of this question where this person asking about like in order to like build a design system, like using components from systems like materials to build UI, or do you think that that just creates unnecessary dependencies?
Yeah. So that's another tough call. I don't think there's definitely a right or wrong answer. It'll again depend on your company and your company's needs. I guess we could talk about some of the trade-offs there, right? So a lot of existing design systems, like you mentioned, material UI, you can use them like just right out of the box, right, with no customization. A lot of design systems will also allow you to kind of style them yourself. So maybe you like the design system, but it needs to be in your company's branded colors or your company's fonts or whatever, right? So that's a great kind of quick and easy way to do that. So that is a great kind of compromise there, right? If you want some of your own styles, but you don't want to actually build and maintain the design system. When it comes to like unnecessary dependencies, that's a good thing to consider, right? Is you want to make sure, again, like the bundle size is small. You don't want to be pulling in a massive dependency into your app. You'll maybe want to make sure it provides some tree shaking so that it only pulls in the specific components you need. And then you also kind of want to be cautious of things like vendor lock-in, where maybe you've built your customizations on top of a specific design system, but now you want to move away from it. it can be tricky sometimes, right? To how do you migrate from one system to another? Often takes a lot of work.
Yep. So thanks. So there's this question about like if you go to DS agnostic, so how do you like integrate between different frameworks, like React and Vue? So
Yeah. So it depends on the technology that you use. So there are some things that are framework agnostic, so things like web components, right? So you could use a design system built on web components, and you could use that in your React or Vue apps, right? So there's, it just works, right? You can use the web components within them. There are also different design systems that have like a core underlying set of like infrastructure components, but then they've exported various versions of it. So like basically you have the design system, but then it can create a React build or a Vue build or an Angular build. And so now you're no longer technically using a framework agnostic version of it, right? You're using your specific framework version, but you've got a bunch of options to choose from, right? If you had multiple apps and multiple technologies. Hopefully that helps. But there's a couple different strategies.
yep. So so it's a bit so we had some compliments about the session. So it's like been very helpful in building design systems with multiple companies and stuff. So there's a follow-up question to that. So how do you convince management to provide these resources and support, especially when I understand this question like where it comes from a top to bottom kind of like a management systems, and where we find those help for the resources and support materials to maintain such design systems and such ecosystems.
Right. Yeah. So that is a good question. I think often it comes down to being able to speak about the need for design system in terms that the business understands, right? The business. So things like, we're wasting time and money by not having design system. We just built 20 different modals in our application, and that was a huge waste of time. We should have just built one and then reused it everywhere, right? Or maybe you're going through some sort of style rebranding refresh right now, and it's painful, right? Like I have to go find this one color code that's been used everywhere in the app, and it's taking me forever to track this all down. Like this would be way nicer. And so if you can kind of pitch it in terms of business value, right, of saving time, providing a consistent experience, that's a more successful strategy, I think. I've also been in companies where we've had a design system, but it was treated more like a side project, right? And it can be helpful to bring up those pain points as well, right? Of like, we have this design system, but everyone's complaining about it. It has bad documentation and it's not well tested. But we don't have any time to work on this, right? Like no one really owns this. No one's in charge. Like this is a problem. So again, like just trying to point out those pain points, speak in the business value, I think will go a long way.
Okay, that's great. I know it's a tricky question, but then, yeah, I mean, makes a lot of sense. So this, I think like one final question we can take. Is there any library escape storybook that you prefer?
Library escape storybook. Trying to make sure I understand the question. Are we asking about like a playbook of how to migrate off of a library, or are we talking specifically about storybook, as in like the amazing little playground you can use to develop components in isolation? I'm gonna take a guess and maybe say you're talking about storybook. And yes, that actually is the one that I prefer. When building design systems, I pretty much always use Storybook. It's a great place to develop components in isolation. And then just having the Storybook like hosted static site, it also provides really good documentation out of the box for you. So hope that helps. Sorry if I'm misinterpreting your question.
Right. I think like we can sort of like answer those questions on the dashboard. But I think like this one final, like some, I mean, there's just one final question that came up, which I thought could be more interesting for many. Sorry for that, but yeah, like what should be proper abstraction level of functionality defined design system? Let's say for table components, should it be only styling in a set of atoms like header or cell, or something more like filtration, select all, and so on?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the proper abstraction level. Trying to think of the best way to answer this. I guess, yeah, okay. So when you build the design system, there are yeah, like these levels of abstraction, right? I think it was mentioned in an earlier talk, but talking about atomic design. So like you have very basic components that are called atoms, and then you have maybe more complex ones that are called molecules, and a molecule might be made up of multiple atoms, right? So you're combining components, and then those can build organisms and templates and pages, right? So you build up as you go. So it's kind of both. I mean, for like a table example, you probably do have components for, table header, table row, table footer, maybe, I don't know, table caption or something, right? But then you might also expose like a larger table component. Sorry, I feel like I'm not answering it very well, but it's kind of both. In your design system, you should have a bunch of atoms as well as molecules and organisms, and then maybe you expose them all and you allow people to construct it the right way, or construct it a way that they would like, while also providing that design guidance, right? Of ideally, here's how you should be using these components to build your app.
Okay, right. All right, so we have more questions coming in, but I'm afraid we have more time to answer them. So I think you can answer those on the chat in the dashboard, so that'll be helpful. And anyway, it was lovely having you today, and thanks for the informative session. And it was so good to hear a lot about like the definitely a lot of takeaways for designers out there. So thanks a lot, Tyler, for being with us, and catch you soon.
Perfect. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.